All right, so week 11 is in the books, and on today's episode, I'm going to talk about all my top waiver wire pickups for week 12, coming right up. And what is up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. And I'm Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please hit subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes and help support the show. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about all of my top waiver wire pickups for week 12. We're getting down to, the last couple of weeks of the fantasy football season. And now this is the crucial weeks that hopefully will get you into the fantasy playoffs. Majority of the listeners are already kind of figured out their fate right now. They know if they're in the playoffs, they're out of the playoffs. But majority of the people out there are still trying to get that last playoff spot. So, hopefully with the next couple weeks, you're able to pick up some of these guys on the waiver wire and help, plug and play and hopefully win you a game so you can get into the playoffs. So this is some of these shows the last couple of weeks of the season are very crucial. So I hope that, you can get some of this information and take it with you and hopefully pick up some players that you need. Before we get in that though, I want to go over some of the news. So it was confirmed today that Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow will be on IR because of the MRI showed that he has a torn ACL, torn MCL, and then my guess is he has some type of medial meniscus tear as well because they didn't reveal that, but they said there's more soft tissue issues with the knee. I see a lot of the news out there on Twitter and social media about trying to predict his recovery and when he'll come back. And obviously being in physical therapy and treating a bunch of ACL reconstructions, everything like that, I do know that he will be good to go for next season. Now, will he start game one of next season? Probably not. He's probably going to, he has, if everything goes according to plan, obviously he has not had surgery yet. Usually they wait for the swelling to go down. That could take a few weeks and then he'll have the surgery. So that means that his timeline is very, very thin when it comes to when he can come back on the field. Now, typical ACL reconstructions take anywhere from 9 to 12 months. So we know that, Adrian Peterson, years ago, he was able to come back within that 9-month range, and then he had a great season the year after. He didn't miss any games, and he led the league in rushing. Those are different beasts. NFL players are different beasts. Now, we know when Carson Wentz tore his ACL, he came back the following season. He didn't miss any games. So I'm not saying that Joe Burrow will be free and clear to play week 1 of 2021, but the timeline now is getting very, very, cautiously optimistic because of the fact that it takes some time to recover, have his surgery, have his rehab, and try to get back to return to sport type of activity. So I do think that there's a chance that he could miss the beginning of next season. But I don't think he'll be put on the PUP. I think he'll be able to play. But there's an interesting take that I heard on ESPN before the Monday Night Football game. Oh, actually, no, it was at halftime. And Booger McFarland was talking about how a lot of people are talking about how the Cincinnati Bengals have such a bad offensive line, and this is kind of what they get for not investing in the offensive line and having a guy like Joe Burrow back there and just waiting for a disaster to happen. And now that it did, now everyone's kind of like, well, like Booger McFarland was talking about how he shouldn't come back and play in 21. He should come back and play in 2022. See if they can finally get that offensive line built up, get some more people around him so he's not wasting next year as well. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think Joe Burrow's too competitive to sit out a whole season. But I guess nowadays you can't really take that lightly because you never thought that you'll see a player hold out for a whole entire season. Le'Veon Bell did that. So there are a lot of things that we just don't know about with certain players that I know it seems like a very outlandish thing to say, but what if he does? What if he decides to they look at what they do in the draft and free agency, and Joe Burrow's looking like, look, I'm not, I don't see how you guys are going to help protect me, so I'm not coming back. And I want to make sure I'm fully healthy. So it's an interesting take. So it will be interesting to kind of see what Joe Burrow decides to do next year when he decides to come back. But with that being the case, hopefully he has a safe seamless recovery, and we'll see him back in 21. And then COVID really hit the NFL on Monday, and we saw news that Vikings wide receiver Adam Thielen, he is now on the COVID list. There's a slim chance that he can play on Sunday, but he's been put on that list. Same thing for Ravens running backs Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins. Those two are put on the COVID list. Now, because they play on Thanksgiving, they will not be available for the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thanksgiving night. So that's a very interesting thing to wake up to on Monday. And then Julio Jones, it looks like he re-aggravated his hamstring, which obviously was kind of the known thing already. And he's a game-time decision for Week 12. So this is something that doesn't not only hurts the Atlanta Falcons offense. I mean, fantasy-wise, it's going to hurt Matt Ryan, Todd Gurley. You're talking about Calvin Ridley, Hayden Hurst. I mean, we all know what Julio Jones means to that offense and when it deals with fantasy repercussions. If Julio Jones not on the field, that's going to be very interesting to kind of see how that offense, shakes up because of it. So hopefully Julio Jones can get the treatment and he'll be able to come back and be able to play against the Raiders in Week 12. And then last, we have Jets coach Adam Gase saying that LaMichael Pirine suffered a high ankle sprain and he's considered week to week. It looks like he won't play in Week 12, which means that Frank Gore should take majority of the carries. But a lot of interesting news, a lot of things, a very busy Monday when it comes to player personnel and what's going on around the league. But with that being the case, let's go into the Monday night game. And honestly, the Rams won this game 27-24 against the Bucs. I've been saying this all year long. This is the primetime Bucs. This is the joke I have for them. They just cannot play well in primetime. I really thought that the Rams would struggle being from the West Coast and having to travel across country and then playing on East Coast time, but didn't faze them. The Rams had a very good game plan against that defense. The Bucs defense just wasn't as stout. Now, they were against the run, but they played way too much zone, and they got eat up all night long. But Jared Goff was able to, Goff went off, and he threw for 376 yards for 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Tom Brady, he had 216 yards passing for 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And I'll talk to my friend about this, and it's like, we always make this joke because we brought Tom Brady in to not give up the ball, not have turnovers. And all we're seeing right now is, it's not as bad as Jameis Winston, but it doesn't, he had 2 really bad throws that caused interceptions, which caused drives to die and caused us not to be able to put points on the board. And against a Rams defense like that, you just can't do that. You need to have every opportunity you can to make sure you score. And the Bucs were not able to do that, and it showed. And they couldn't run the ball against the Rams. And passing the ball, they started off okay, but then they just, for a long period of time, couldn't do anything. And, in the second half, it looked like they were finally getting their groove, and, they just had turnovers and they couldn't get the win. But overall, from a fantasy standpoint, from the running back position, the Rams didn't do anything on the ground. Malcolm Brown had 20 yards rushing on 3 carries, so he led the backfield. Darrell Henderson, he had 8 carries for 5 yards. This is a known thing against the Bucs defensive line. You're not really going to do a lot when it comes to rushing the ball. Ronald Jones, he was 10 for 24. Now, Leonard Fournette, he had 7 carries for 17 yards, but he had the lone touchdown for that backfield. But from a wide receiver standpoint, the Rams, both Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods just ate up that zone defense. And Cooper Kupp had 11 receptions for 145 yards on 13 targets. And then Robert Woods had 12 receptions for 103 yards and a touchdown on 15 targets. So those were the only 2 guys getting the ball all game, and we could not stop them. The Bucs were just awful against them on Monday night, so they really need to clean that up. And then on the Bucs side of the ball, Antonio Brown, he had the most targets. He had 13 targets. He was 8 for 57. Chris Godwin, he was 7 for 53 and a touchdown on 10 targets. And Mike Evans was 5 for 49 and a touchdown on 9 targets. So that is the recap of Monday Night Football. Being a Bucs fan, it's very frustrating to kind of see this because, we play the Rams and then we play the Chiefs coming Sunday. And, I know I talk about the Bucs a lot, but they're my team and I have no shame on talking about them. But it's just one of those things where you have high expectations going into the season and then things don't play out your way. And you think that, we got Tom Brady, so things should ultimately mean that we're going to win every game. And Bucks have, what's so frustrating about the Bucks is that they have so much talent on offense, they can't do anything. I mean, it's just a reoccurring thing every week. It's the same conversation every week. Like, how do you have this many targets and you can't do anything from an NFL standpoint or from a fantasy standpoint? And there's a lot of fantasy implications in this Monday night game. So hopefully you all won. I was lucky enough to win. I keep my undefeated streak alive. I'm 11-0 now. I won by 5 points, and it was getting really close at the end because I was going against Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, and Darrell Henderson. And when the Bucks got the ball back within I think 2 minutes left, I was concerned because it took a couple passes to catch from Godwin and Gronk, and I could have been, on my way to my first loss of the season. But, I was able to win, so it was good. So now on to week 12. But with that being the case, let's talk about all of the top waiver wire pickups for week 12. And let's start off with the quarterback position. Now, my first quarterback on my list is Taysom Hill. Now, I know that he's owned in 86% of leagues, but there's a chance that some people did not pick him up because he was only designated as, in a majority of platforms, he was only designated as a quarterback, but in ESPN, he was designated as a quarterback and a tight end. So ESPN has fixed that. They will now designate him only as a quarterback. So if you're able to take advantage of that and put Taysom Hill in your tight end position, you probably won your week this week because that was almost like a cheat code. You did exactly what you should have done. I understand a lot of people don't like that, but he was eligible to play in your tight end position, so you play him. That's just ESPN's, policy. That's what they did. The good thing is they fixed it for week 12 and going forward. So that means that you only got 1 week out Taysom Hill, and now you got to figure out who you want to play at quarterback because most people have better quarterbacks than Taysom Hill. But it's just one of those things where it was just a very interesting scenario going on this week with Taysom Hill. And then my second quarterback is Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, he's owned in 20% of leagues. He's had a couple good games so far. So, I think Kirk Cousins is starting to get his groove. I know that it's all about matchups, and then his next 2 matchups are against the Panthers and the Jags. So I can still see Kirk Cousins being a legitimate streamer for the next couple weeks. Now, if he doesn't have Adam Thielen, that may change the perspective a little bit because obviously you want to have all of your receivers available for you. But I think that Kirk Cousins deserves to be picked up and hopefully a streamer for the next couple weeks. Same thing for Daniel Jones. He's my third quarterback on my list. Now he's 17% owned. And, I know this is a quarterback that has not had a very good season. He is doing a lot more on the ground than he is in the air. But the good thing is that the Giants have Cincinnati next week, and then they play the Seattle Seahawks, who are the worst pass defense, or one of the worst pass defenses. So I think that if you're looking for somebody, if you're really hurt at the quarterback position, or you're in a super flex league and Daniel Jones is there, give him a shot and see what he does. I think that it definitely would be a good pickup for the next couple weeks. And then my last quarterback is Derek Carr. Now Derek Carr, he has been balling. He had a very good game against the Chiefs. I've always been a Derek Carr truther. I've always liked it when he came in the league. I felt like he doesn't get the right, amount of respect because, he's had these ebbs and flows of good seasons, and he hasn't had, other than a few years ago, he hasn't had really a good season until now. And, he's only 30% owned, and he plays the Falcons and the Jets the next 2 games. So if you're looking to try to get into the playoffs, you're looking for a streamer, you need somebody to play. He has the weapons around him now. So the big difference is with Derek Carr this year is that he has a Darren Waller, he has Josh Jacobs, he has a good running game, he has the receivers around him. So Derek Carr continues to be a very good quarterback. Overall in fantasy, I know the week before they ran the ball a ton, so he didn't really have any fantasy. He really doing much fantasy wise a couple weeks ago, but they know that's not the formula to win. They know they have to run the ball effectively and then be able to pass the ball. So Derek Carr for the next couple weeks, I think he's a good streamer. Okay, now moving on to the running back position. My number 1 running back to pick up this week for week 12 is Gus Edwards. Now he's owned in 7% of leagues, and the reason why I have him number 1 is because he's really the only running back on this list that's going to give you some playing time this week. We know that J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram are going to be out on Thursday night against the Steelers, but that is the only bad side about it is the Gus Edwards plays the Steelers. So you get a starting running back, you get a guy who's going to get majority of the carries, and you may see a little bit of Justice Hill in there as well, but I do think that you're getting a guy that's going to get the majority of the workload because 2 running backs are out. So if you need a running back, have some low expectations because Steelers are obviously the top defense, but at least you get a running back that will get the workload. And then my second running back is James White. We saw Rex Burkhead go out with a knee injury, and I think James White goes right back into his normal, role as being the third down back, catching a lot of balls out of the backfield. Now he's still owned in 36% of leagues. Now on Sunday he was, he had 5 carries for 19 yards. Then he had 6 receptions for 64 yards. So, I think that Rex Burkhead was starting to take some of the playing time away from James White. Now that Rex Burkhead is out, I think James White now continues to have his fantasy relevance because of what his skill set is. So James White is my second running back. And now the next few running backs are pretty much guys that are handcuffs for the people who are in the playoffs and do need just the handcuffs for their top guys. So I have Tony Pollard there. He's 21% owned. And we saw that he had a really long touchdown on Sunday against the Vikings. So that's always encouraging because he's not going to get majority of the workload, but he does get enough where he could break off a run like that. So, but if you're a Ezekiel Elliott owner, you want to have Tony Pollard on your bench just in case he does go down. And then I have Carlos Hyde next. He's 32% owned. Now, Carlos Hyde, that's a little different story because we know that Chris Carson is still out. We don't know what his stats will be for Monday night. But obviously, if you need that help at running back and you're a Chris Carson owner, Carlos Hyde's there. So I think that Carlos Hyde is a guy, other than Gus Edwards, is a guy that you possibly could play because Chris Carson may not be back. So definitely a good pickup there. And then Frank Gore's my next running back. He's 9% owned. Now, we know that LaMichael Pirine is out. We saw Frank Gore take the majority of the carries after that. He had a decent PPR game. So, Frank Gore is one of those guys where he's all about the workload, and it looks like he's going to have it. So for at least the next couple of weeks, Frank Gore should be a starting running back. However, do you trust the Jets offense? Do you trust exactly what he can provide from you fantasy-wise? So unless you're in dire need of and desperate, Frank Gore's there. But try to look elsewhere if you have better players out there. And then on my 6th on my list is Sony Michel. Now, Sony Michel was taken off the IR. He did not play on Sunday. However, he is making his way back. And we don't know exactly what his role will be because we know that Damian Harris has done pretty well since he's been playing. So does Sony Michel come right back into a starting role? Probably not. But Sony Michel is there just in case you need the depth, just in case something does happen to Damian Harris. And then for an honorable mention pickups, I have Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson here. There was reports Monday that said that DeAndre Swift is still not out of the concussion protocol. And the fact that they have a Thursday night game or a Thursday game on Thanksgiving, there's a high probability he's not going to play. So if you're looking for a running back help and you really need the play, then Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson are the guys that you would go to. I still think Adrian Peterson is a guy that will get majority of the carries, but hopefully DeAndre Swift does play so you don't have to make that call and get a goose egg from one of those running backs. But now moving on to the wide receiver position. I still have Jalen Reagor here as my number 1 wide receiver to pick up. He's still only 25% owned. He's starting to kind of not tune out, but he's starting to kind of phase out Travis Fulgham now. So it looks like Jalen Reagor is the guy that is starting to become that number 1 wide receiver. He had he's averaged 6 targets a game since he's returned. On Sunday, he was 4 for 52. So, not big numbers, but it's all about opportunities and how many targets he's getting. So I just continue to see that number going up. They need to start getting back to what they know is passing the ball and running the ball effectively. So I think Jalen Reagor he's out there. Hopefully you're able to pick him up. Then my second wide receiver is Michael Pittman Jr. Now he's 26% owned. I've mentioned him in the last couple of waiver wire shows. On Sunday, he was 3 for 66 on 3 targets, so he didn't get the majority of the target share. However, he led the team in receiving, so that's what you want to see. You want to see opportunities. So he's a guy that I think should be considered to pick up. May not be a guy that you can really trust to play right now, but if you're a playoff team, at least you have some wide receiver depth going forward. And then third is Allen Lazard. He's now 31.4% owned. So on Sunday, we saw him return from his core injury. He didn't really do much. He had, 2 catches, but I do think that this was the plan. They said this was the plan all along, that they're going to try to gradually get him back into full reps and full snaps, but he's a guy that you can stash on your bench if he's available, and hopefully by the time the playoffs come and you're playing in your fantasy playoffs, you have a good wide receiver there. And then next I have Nelson Agholor. So Nelson Agholor, he's 15% owned. He had a massive game on Sunday. He was 6 for 88 and a touchdown on 9 targets. Now, the problem with Nelson Agholor is you pick him up, you decide to play him, he does nothing for you. I mean, he's only had 4 or more targets in 4 games this year. So that's the ugly thing about it, is that you had a game where he had 9 targets on Sunday, then he'll come back around and have 2 targets and no touchdowns and 10 yards receiving. So that's the hard thing about it. It's not consistent. However, he has 6 touchdowns so far this year. So I mean, it's a high risk, high reward type of situation with Nelson Agholor. I mean, there's games where he gets completely shut down, and then games like we had on Sunday where he blows up. So it's a add at your own risk. And then next is Brashad Perriman. He's 13% owned, and he had another good game on Sunday from a PPR standpoint. He had 2 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. Now, he only had 4 targets, but this is his 3rd touchdown in 2 games. He is the go-to wide receiver. I know, with him and Denzel Mims, it's a pretty decent wide receiver core for Sam Darnold or Joe Flacco, whoever's the quarterback. But it definitely, for the next 3 games, though, he's getting Miami, Las Vegas, and Seattle. So may not be the sexiest pickup, but he's a guy that you can play and hopefully get you some points. My next receiver is Tim Patrick. He is 14% owned, and now had another good game on Sunday. He had 5 catches for 119 yards and 8 targets. And honestly, the last 3 games, he's averaging 13.3 PPR points. So, I mean, if you're looking for wide receiver help, if you're playing in a deep league and you're in a PPR format, I mean, Tim Patrick is the guy who's getting he's getting the benefits of being the number 2 on that team, because Jerry Jeudy takes the majority of the coverage. Then you got KJ Hamler in the slot. Noah Fant, they got to account for him. You got Melvin Gordon, who's a good pass-catching running back. So, I mean, Tim Patrick is a very talented wide receiver. It's surprising that he's still barely owned in any of these leagues. And if you need wide receiver help, I mean, it's week 12 now. I mean, some of these guys can't help you. I mean, you got injuries. We don't have any bye weeks this week, but he should be added just in case you have an injury or you need a good matchup play. And then my next wide receiver is Russell Gage. He is 9% owned. On Sunday, though, I mean, he had 7 catches for 58 yards and off the 12 targets. So obviously this has everything to do with Julio Jones not being available in that game, majority of the game. So we've been on this roller coaster ride with Russell Gage already, and people picked him up. He was one of those hot waiver wire pickups earlier in the year. People played him, didn't do anything for you. I'm concerned about it being the same scenario, that you pick him up. He had 12 targets, but how consistent is that going to be? They have some decent matchups going forward, but I don't know if I want to be in the Russell Gage business. At least I'd rather have anybody who I just mentioned. I'd rather have over Russell Gage. Then my last wide receiver here is Dez Bryant. Now, I know this is not the sexiest name or the sexiest pickup. He is 8% owned, but on Sunday he had 4 catches for 28 yards off of 5 targets. So Marquise Brown, he's completely out of the picture. I don't see how you can play Marquise Brown anymore. A lot of people continue to play Marquise Brown. You might as well put your clown mask on, because you're waiting for something that's not going to happen. And of course, when you don't play him, something will happen. But you gotta think, they gotta play the Steelers on on Thursday on Thanksgiving. So are you really gonna play Marquise Brown against the Steelers defense? Probably not. Dez Bryant is a guy that, I'm not saying you should play him against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Dez Bryant is just a bigger bodied target where I think that's gonna help Lamar Jackson. So, it's not a guy that I will personally put on my roster because I don't need the wide receiver help, but you got to follow kind of where the target share is going. I know it's only been 1 game, but I think Dez Bryant going forward can really help the Ravens offense, and hopefully this opens up Marquise Brown. I mean, you saw Mark Andrews have a good game on Sunday, so hopefully this allows some improvements to the overall passing game. But all right, so we're going to move on to the tight end position, and my first tight end on this list is Jordan Reed. Now, he was on a bye week, so a lot of people probably forgot about him, but he is owned in 15% of leagues. And then before the bye week, he had 5 catches for 62 yards on 6 targets. And then the week before that, he had a very, like against the Packers on that Thursday night game, he had like 1 catch or something like that. So hasn't been the best showing for Jordan Reed. However, we know that that tight end is used in that offense. I mean, George Kittle, just because George Kittle isn't there, I know he's a different beast of a tight end, but they still want to implement the tight end. And I think that Jordan Reed continues to actually have a decent, every time he's substituted in for George Kittle when he was injured, he's done, on average, he's done pretty well. So I think Jordan Reed deserves to be added in most leagues, especially if you need tight end help. Tight end has been awful. I mean, I had Hayden Hurst get me 0 points this past week. So it's hard to win weeks when you have 0 points from your tight end position. So my assumption is that Jordan Reed could do more than that. And then going on to Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys. Now he is 23% owned. Now he had a pretty decent game PPR wise. He was 4 for 24 and a touchdown on Sunday off of 6 targets. Now the only problem is this week he plays the Washington football team, which they already played this year, and had a very bad game. He had 2 catches for 22 yards off of 4 targets. That whole Dallas Cowboys offense had a bad game against the Washington football team. So this is definitely not the best matchup this week. But I do think that going forward, Dalton Schultz could be a decent streamer. And then my last tight end for the week is Jordan Akins. Now, this is a guy that is kind of a unknown guy. I mean, he's 2% owned. But it looks like the Houston Texans are starting to implement the tight end a little bit more. He's averaging 8 points per game. I know that's not a lot, but it's something, right? And on Sunday he was 5 for 83 off of 6 targets. So I think that their game against the Detroit Lions could be a decent streamer like type of option, but that's a high risk option there. I mean, Jordan Akins, he had a good game against the Patriots, but is that something that you can see consistently? That's one of these things where I'm looking for other tight ends I can play. I mean, is Jared Cook out there? Is Robert Tonyan out there? Are some of these guys that are in better offenses out there for you? Because not saying that the Texans have a bad offense, but I just think that I want to see more production from the tight end on that offense before I decide to play him with comfort. So now going on to the defensive streamers for this week. I got 3 teams on this list. I got the Browns. They're playing the Jags. The New York Giants are playing the Bengals. Now that they don't have Joe Burrow, I think that really hit, and they don't have Joe Mixon. So that's a massive hit to that offense. So I think a lot of the Bengals players are just, you can't play those guys. I mean, T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd, unfortunately, they just lost a lot of their fantasy value. I'm not going to trust their backup quarterback on trying to keep up that production. So the Giants are a good streamer. And then the Packers play Chicago. So the Packers are playing against a team that are unsure if they're going to have Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky. So they're going to be playing the 3rd string quarterback. So I think that could be a good streamer as well. But, don't forget on Thursday, on Thanksgiving, we got 3 games. All right. So we got the Texans versus the Lions. We got the Washington football team versus the Cowboys. And then the Thursday night game is the Ravens versus the Steelers. So big games coming up for Thursday night. I'll be doing my episode for all the starts and sits tomorrow on Wednesday, so look out for that. But that's it for today's episode. Check us back out on Wednesday when I drop all the starts and sits for Thanksgiving Day. But don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes. And then if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us over on the Gridiron Pod on Twitter and Facebook. We're at Gridiron Fantasy Football on Instagram. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.